The Mind, the Gap story, London Underground. Among the countless sounds that echo through the London Underground, none is more instantly recognizable than the crisp, steady announcement, "Mind the gap." Simple, functional, and repeated endlessly each day, it has become a defining feature of the tube, etched into the memory of generations of commuters and tourists alike. But behind this familiar phrase lies a deeply human story, one that moves beyond routine travel into love, loss, and remembrance. At Embankment Station, the words carry not just practical meaning but emotional weight. They are the preserved voice of Oswald Lawrence, an actor whose recorded warning once echoed across multiple platforms before being replaced by digital systems. After his passing, his widow, Dr. Margaret McCollum, discovered that the only place she could still hear her late husband's voice was on the daily commute, when even that was taken away by modernization. She petitioned the Underground to restore the recording at Embankment, turning an ordinary announcement into a personal tribute. Today, every traveler who hears "Mind the Gap" at that station unknowingly shares in her story, encountering not just a safety message but a legacy of love preserved in sound. This is more than a tale about transport. It is about how something as mundane as a recorded announcement can become a living memorial, a bridge between memory and the present, and a reminder that the Underground is not only a machine of movement but also a vessel of human stories carried through time. The phrase "Mind the Gap" was first introduced in 1968, a practical solution to a very real problem. The design of many Underground stations, particularly on curved platforms, meant there was often a noticeable space between the edge of the platform and the train doors. Passengers rushing in and out were at risk of stumbling, tripping, or even falling. Staff announcements had been used for years, but constant repetition strained workers' voices and lacked consistency. Engineers at London Transport came up with an innovative idea, a pre-recorded message that could play automatically, ensuring safety instructions were always delivered clearly and reliably. It was one of the earliest examples of automation on the network, and quickly became part of its soundscape. The phrase itself was deliberately short, sharp, and easy to understand even in the noisy environment of a tube station. Over time, "Mind the Gap" grew from being purely functional to becoming iconic. For Londoners, it was a familiar backdrop to daily life, as ordinary and expected as the rumble of trains or the screech of brakes. For tourists, it was a symbol of the city itself, often imitated or recorded as a souvenir of their visit. The calm, authoritative tone of the announcement gave it a character beyond mere words, embedding it into London's cultural fabric. Yet behind this everyday message was a voice real, human, and distinct, that would one day take on a meaning far deeper than anyone could have predicted. In the case of Oswald Lawrence, the actor whose voice became the "Mind the Gap" heard at Embankment Station, those three words would eventually transcend their utilitarian origins to become a vessel of love, memory, and grief for his widow. What began as a simple act of passenger safety became, through circumstance and emotion, a profoundly human story woven into the mechanical rhythm of the Underground. Oswald Lawrence was not a household name, but his voice would become immortal. A professional actor with a career that spanned stage and screen, he had the rich, articulate tone that casting directors sought for authoritative narration. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, when London Transport began recording standardized announcements, Lawrence was hired to lend his voice to the infamous "Mind the Gap." His delivery struck the perfect balance, calm yet commanding, warm yet precise, the kind of voice that passengers instinctively trusted. Over the years, countless people heard him without knowing his name, associating his words with the daily rhythm of city life. Beyond his professional work, Lawrence was remembered by those who knew him as a charming, thoughtful man with a quiet strength. He later married Dr. Margaret McCollum, a general practitioner who cherished not only his presence but also the distinctive voice that so many Londoners unknowingly carried in their memories. For her, his recorded announcement became a unique symbol of their shared life. Unlike most widows who rely on photographs or letters, McCollum could step onto a platform and hear her late husband's voice resonating across tiled walls, reminding strangers and loved ones alike to mind the space before them. After his passing in 2007, this connection took on a sacred quality. While the world moved on, technology updated, and voices changed, she found comfort in knowing that somewhere in the city, Oswald's voice still lived on. Embankment Station became her personal sanctuary, a place where her daily commute was also a quiet moment of remembrance. What was for millions a routine safety announcement became, for her, an intimate messenger thread tying the past to the present. reminding her of a love that endured beyond death. As the underground modernized in the early 21st century, the familiar soundscape of stations began to change. New digital recording systems were introduced, offering crisp clarity and the ability to automate a wider range of announcements. Many of the older voices, including Oswald Lawrence's, were gradually phased out. To most passengers, the change was barely noticeably an update that blended into the constant evolution of London's transit network, but for Dr. Margaret McCollum, it was devastating. By 2012, when she boarded a train at Embankment Station, she discovered that her husband's voice, the one constant she still heard daily since his passing, had been replaced by a different recording. What had once been her personal connection to him, woven seamlessly into the routine of her commute, was gone. She described feeling a profound sense of loss, as though she had lost him for a second time. Photographs and memories kept him alive in her home, but hearing his voice in the midst of a busy station had given her a unique comfort that nothing else could replicate. Heartbroken, she reached out to Transport for London TfL, not to demand a sweeping restoration, but simply to ask if there was any way she could have a copy of the original recording. Her request was not framed as a complaint but as a personal plea, an attempt to hold on to the last living remnant of her husband's presence. What she could not have known was how deeply her story would resonate with those who heard it. Within TfL, her words struck a chord. Staff who had never met Oswald Lawrence suddenly understood that the Mind the Gap announcement was not just a piece of automated safety messaging, but also the last echo of a life once lived, a love once shared, and a legacy that still mattered. What began as one widow's heartfelt request would soon become a public story that touched hearts far beyond London. When Transport for London received Dr. Margaret McCollum's request, what might have seemed like a simple technical matter quickly transformed into an act of compassion. The staff understood that this was not just about a recording, but about memory, grief, and the enduring power of love. At first, engineers dug through their archives, searching for the original reel that had carried Oswald Lawrence's voice for decades. Much of the material had been replaced or digitized, and there were fears that his announcement might have been lost forever. But after a painstaking search, they located the recording, a fragile piece of audio history tucked away among older files. Technicians carefully restored the sound, preserving Lawrence's distinct tone while ensuring it could be played on modern equipment. What began as an internal task soon became a mission of respect, not only to honor McCollum's request, but to give Londoners back a voice that had quietly defined their journeys for generations. Rather than simply hand her a copy, TfL decided to go further. They reinstated Oswald Lawrence's Mind the Gap at Embankment Station, the very place where McCollum had listened to him for years. In doing so, they created something rare, a public space transformed into a memorial. For commuters, it was a safety announcement like any other, but for one woman, it was the return of her husband's presence. When the restoration was announced in 2013, the story captured headlines worldwide. Newspapers, television, and radio all shared the tale of how a widow's love had brought back a voice thought lost. People who had never met Lawrence or McCollum found themselves moved by the story, reminded of the profound humanity hidden within everyday details of city life. The underground, often viewed as impersonal and mechanical, suddenly felt intimate and alive with meaning. The act of restoring a voice was no longer just about nostalgia. It was about empathy, about recognizing that even within a vast transit system, the smallest gestures can carry the deepest weight. The public reaction to the restoration of Oswald Lawrence's Mind the Gap announcement at Embankment Station was overwhelming. What had started as a deeply personal request by one woman quickly grew into a story that resonated with people across London and far beyond. Commuters who had grown accustomed to the change in voice suddenly found themselves stopping to listen, realizing that this particular announcement carried with it something unique, a human story hidden in plain sight. Newspapers ran features describing the romance and grief behind the voice, while television crews filmed passengers pausing at the platform, their expressions softening as they learned about the widow whose husband's memory had been preserved in the station's soundscape. Social media buzzed with messages of admiration for Transport for London's decision, with many calling it one of the most touching acts of kindness they had ever seen in a city often criticized for being cold and impersonal. Tourists began to seek out Embankment Station not just for travel but to hear the legendary recording, adding it to their list of London experiences alongside Big Ben and Buckingham Palace. For Londoners, the story stirred a sense of pride that their city had chosen to honor love and memory in a place where most people expect only efficiency and routine. For Dr. Margaret McCollum, the response was bittersweet. She was deeply moved to see how her personal story had touched strangers around the world. But most of all, she was grateful to once again hear her husband's voice in the place where it had always belonged. Every time the announcement played, she knew Oswald was, in some small way, still present. It transformed her daily journeys into moments of reflection, but it also gave her comfort in knowing that his voice was now shared with millions of others. What had been a loss doubled by modernization was now a love story immortalized in sound, proving that even within the mechanical rhythm of the underground, there is room for humanity, tenderness, and remembrance. The story of Oswald Lawrence's voice at Embankment soon grew beyond its original context, becoming a symbol of how ordinary sounds can hold extraordinary meaning. In a city as vast and fast-paced as London, commuters rarely pause to consider the announcements that guide them through their daily routines, yet the Mind the Gap recording revealed how deeply these sounds become woven into personal and collective memory. For many Londoners, the underground is more than just transport. It is a backdrop to their lives. Relationships begin on platforms, careers are launched with daily commutes, and moments of joy, stress, or sorrow play out against the hum of trains and the rhythm of announcements. In this sense, Lawrence's voice was never just functionally, it was part of the soundtrack of London itself. When his widow's story came to light, people reflected on how voices, even when anonymous, become intimate companions in the repetition of everyday life. Passengers realized that they had unconsciously internalized the tone and cadence of his words, and that hearing them again was like reconnecting with an old friend. It reminded the public that infrastructure is not only steel, concrete, and machinery, but also emotion, memory, and humanity. The decision to restore one man's voice demonstrated the profound ways that individuals leave their mark on the fabric of a city. Even when they are not famous or widely recognized, Oswald Lawrence may not have been known to the millions who heard him, but his contribution endured in a way more powerful than many public figures. His voice became a living testament to the intimacy of sound, and to the idea that even the smallest human details like three-spoken words can leave legacies that outlast lifetimes. At its heart, the restoration of Oswald Lawrence's Mind the Gap was not just about transport or even tradition, it was about memory, grief, and the quiet ways in which sound can heal. For Dr. Margaret McCollum, hearing her late husband's voice in such a public yet personal setting provided a form of comfort that no photograph or keepsake could replicate. Sound is unique in its ability to bring presence into absence. A voice carries intonation, warmth, and character that instantly reconnects us to the person behind it. In the chaos of a London commute, his voice was steady, familiar, and deeply reassuring, bridging the gap between past and present. Psychologists often note the powerful role of sound in memory, recall how a single tone, phrase, or melody can unlock emotions long buried. In this case, 3 simple words became a lifeline, helping one woman carry her love through the years of loss. But her experience also resonated more broadly. Countless people saw in her story a reflection of their own longing to hold on to those they had lost. Whether it was a voicemail saved, an old radio clip remembered, or the sound of laughter in a home movie, many understood instantly why the announcement mattered so much. Lawrence's voice became a vessel of collective empathy, reminding people that grief is not about letting go, but about finding ways to continue the connection. In turning an ordinary safety message into a memorial, the underground showed how even the most functional aspects of a city can be transformed into spaces of healing. Each time his words echo at Embankment, they remind passengers that love endures, that voices carry memory, and that the smallest sounds can become some of the most profound treasures in life. The story of the restored Mind the Gap voice did not remain confined to London. It quickly spread across the world, carried by newspapers, television networks, and online platforms that saw in it something universally moving. From Europe to North America, from Asia to Australia, media outlets reported on how a widow's love had brought back a voice long thought lost, and how a public institution had responded with rare compassion. People everywhere connected with the idea that something as mundane as a transit announcement could embody such intimacy and meaning. Letters poured into Transport for London from strangers who had read or watched the story, expressing gratitude that a city had honored not only its history but the private grief of one woman. Social media amplified the tale, with users sharing their own experiences of holding on to a loved one's voice, sometimes through an old answering machine tape, a cherished recording, or even the memory of a familiar phrase repeated so often it became inseparable from the person who spoke it. The universality of the story lay in its simplicity. Everyone has known love. Everyone has faced loss. and everyone understands the comfort of hearing a voice that once filled their world. For London, the story became a source of quiet pride. Proof that the city's most iconic elements could transcend their practical purpose and become symbols of humanity. Tourists traveling through Embankment began seeking out the announcement, not because they needed to be warned of the gap, but because they wanted to hear the legacy of Oswald Lawrence, a man they had never met, but whose words now resonated globally. In this way, the Mind the Gap announcement became more than a local curiosity. It became a universal parable about memory, compassion, and the power of small gestures to bridge not only the space between train and platform but also the gap between past and present, grief and comfort, loss and love. The Mind the Gap story also revealed something profound about the way people experience cities through sound as much as through sight. London is famous for its landmarks: Big Ben, Tower Bridge, St. Paul's Cathedral, but just as powerful are the sounds that form its invisible architecture. The clatter of trains over rails, the ring of bus bells, and the distinctive announcements of the underground are as much a part of the city's identity as its skyline. When Oswald Lawrence's voice returned to Embankment, it reminded Londoners that cities are not just bricks, concrete, and steel. They are living organisms composed of human stories layered into their soundscapes. To those who passed through Embankment daily, the announcement was no longer just a safety instruction but part of a shared cultural memory. It illustrated how even utilitarian voices could become emotional landmarks, guiding not only bodies through physical space but also hearts through the currents of time. The story also highlighted the fragile balance between modernization and memory. As cities evolve, old sounds often disappear, replaced by cleaner, sharper recordings or silenced altogether in the name of efficiency. Yet what may seem like a minor update to technology can strip away a piece of character, erasing echoes that connect generations. The decision to reinstate Lawrence's voice showed that progress need not mean forgetting. It can mean carrying memory forward alongside innovation. For passengers at Embankment, the experience of hearing his words is layered. They are simultaneously warned of a gap and reminded that behind the people systems machinery lies a deeply human heartbeat. In this way, the London Underground was reframed not merely as a transportation system but as a cultural institution, one that embodies the collective memory of the city and its people. And in Oswald Lawrence's enduring phrase, the city proved that even its smallest sounds can hold the power to define identity, nurture memory, and honor love. Over time, the Mind the Gap story has become more than a touching anecdote. It has grown into a lasting legacy that symbolizes the human side of a city often defined by speed, efficiency, and scale. Londoners now point to Embankment Station as more than just a stop on the Northern and Bakerloo lines. It has become a place of quiet pilgrimage, where a practical announcement doubles as a living memorial. For visitors, hearing Oswald Lawrence's voice is no longer only about safety. It is about witnessing a love story woven into the fabric of the city. The decision to restore the announcement demonstrated that public institutions, often criticized for bureaucracy and detachment, can act with empathy, showing that behind the machinery of government and transport, there are people willing to honor humanity. The legacy extends further still, offering inspiration to other cities grappling with questions of preservation. Should familiar sounds be saved when technology changes them? Should voices and phrases that once shaped daily life be archived for future generations? In this sense, the Mind the Gap story is part of a broader conversation about cultural memory, how the seemingly ordinary details of public life can carry extraordinary meaning. For Dr. Margaret McCollum, the restored announcement will always be intensely personal, but for others, it is now a universal reminder that even the most mundane parts of life can become symbols of love and resilience. Each repetition of those three words echoes beyond their original purpose, transforming into a chorus of memory that honors both an individual and a collective identity. What was once a simple safety message has become an enduring part of London's soul, showing that sometimes the most profound legacies are not grand monuments, but familiar voices that whisper through the noise of daily life. Ultimately, the tale of Oswald Lawrence and the restored Mind the Gap is a reminder that cities are not just built from bricks, glass, and steel, but from the lives, loves, and memories of the people who inhabit them. What began as a three-word safety instruction grew into a bridge between the mechanical and the human, between past and present, between one widow's grief and the collective empathy of millions. It showed that progress does not have to erase history and that modernization can coexist with preservation when compassion guides decisions. For Dr. Margaret McCollum, hearing her husband's voice again at Embankment Station was more than a personal comfort. It was proof that love can leave echoes powerful enough to outlast death. For Londoners, it became a lesson in how the smallest details of daily life, the announcement of a gap, the rhythm of footsteps, the tone of a familiar phrase can carry meaning far beyond their functional origins. And for the world, it became a story of hope, demonstrating that in an age of rapid change, humanity still finds ways to honor memory, nurture compassion, and connect across generations. Every day, as trains pull into embankment and passengers are reminded to mind the space between platform and carriage, they also become part of this living tribute. Most may not know the full story, but the act of hearing those words ties them to a legacy of love and resilience. In this way, Oswald Lawrence's voice continues to serve, not only by keeping people safe, but by reminding them that behind every public system lies human stories waiting to be remembered. The underground may be a machine of movement, but in the echo of one man's voice, it also became a monument to love, memory, and the enduring truth that sometimes the simplest words can carry the deepest meaning.